When you really stop and think about it, the scale of the Star Wars franchise is it's staggering. We're talking about this epic space opera that completely reshaped pop culture, and it all began with one film that really no one expected to be a hit back in 1977.
It's so much more than a cultural moment, though. It's an economic engine, a leviathan, really,
Yeah.
that has just proven over and over again for decades that it can expand and reinvent itself. And the financial power behind it is almost without equal in entertainment.
Absolutely. When we look at the data, the box office numbers alone, just for the films, are over 10 billion US dollars. That puts it right up there as the third highest grossing film franchise of all time. But that number, as big as it is, doesn't even tell the whole story.
No, not even close. And that's where you see the real genius, or at least the real insight, of George Lucas. He made this one decision early on that completely changed the financial model for Hollywood. He basically turned the movie into an ad for the products. So by 2012, and this is before the Disney sale, the revenue from just merchandising, toys, books, clothes, games, was already around $20 billion.
Double the box office.
Double the box office. It's a universe that was, from very early on, designed to generate money on every single platform you can imagine.
And the result of that, of constantly generating all this content across films and TV and games and novels, is a fictional history that's incredibly complex. It's this chaotic, sprawling collection of stories and timelines that can feel, well, completely overwhelming if you're trying to get a handle on the whole galaxy.
That's a perfect way to put it. For someone new coming in, or even for fans just trying to keep up with a new direction, it feels less like a series of movies and more like an entire parallel history you have to learn.
So our goal today, looking at all the material here, is to try and bring some order to that chaos. We're going to map it all out. The core stories, the mythology underneath it all, the new chronological timeline they've created, and the really complex history of all its different media. So by the end, you should have a clear, organized way of looking at this galaxy and its huge impact on our own world.
Right. And to do that, you really have to start in one place. You have to start with the Skywalker saga.
Okay, so let's define that term first.
Right.
What exactly is the Skywalker saga?
It refers specifically to the 9 episodic films. So episodes IS all the way through IX. They're structured as 3 separate trilogies, but they're all connected by one central conflict. The Skywalker family were very strong with the Force against the Sith Lord, Palpatine.
Also known as Darth Sidious. And the way they were released is fascinating in itself because it wasn't in chronological order at all. The first film came out in May 1977, and it was just called Star Wars. That's it. It was only later, I think in 1979, that it was retitled Episode 4, A New Hope. That was after Lucas realized the full scope of the story he wanted to tell, and the idea for the prequels was really starting to form.
Exactly. That original trilogy, A New Hope, then The Empire Strikes Back in 1980 and Return of the Jedi in 83, that was the foundation. That's what introduced the world to these archetypes, the visual style, the core struggle that just captured everyone's imagination. And critically, it was recognized by the establishment right away.
You mean with the Academy Awards?
Yes. Those first 3 films were nominated for and won multiple Oscars. It helped establish science fiction not just as, a profitable genre, but as a prestigious one.
So then there's this long gap. And after almost 2 decades, George Lucas comes back to write and direct the prequels, which was a hugely anticipated event. This trilogy, The Phantom Menace in '99, Attack of the Clones in 2002, and Revenge of the Sith in 2005, it represented a massive technological shift.
A huge one. He was leveraging all these advances in CGI to build these enormous worlds and these massive droid armies that were just completely impossible to create back in the 70s and 80s.
And this is really important for understanding his original vision, right? Lucas saw the first 6 episodes, I through 6, as one single complete work. He even called the whole arc the tragedy of Darth Vader.
That's the key. This wasn't just a fun space adventure for him. It was an epic tragedy. It was about one man's catastrophic fall from grace and his eventual very last-minute redemption.
Let's unpack that tragedy a bit, because in the original trilogy, Vader is just pure evil. He's this machine, this enforcer for the Empire. But the prequels, they force you to see him as Anakin Skywalker, a gifted kid who's deeply traumatized by being born into slavery and who lives in constant fear of losing the people he loves.
Especially his wife, Padme. And the tragedy is that all of his horrible actions, his turn to the dark side, it's all fueled by that attachment, by his desperate and ultimately misguided attempts to save her, which is the one thing the Jedi Code forbids.
In non-attachment.
Exactly. The Jedi preached non-attachment to prevent that exact kind of emotional corruption. But Anakin's fall really shows the failure of the Jedi Order itself. Their rigidity pushed him away right when he needed guidance the most. So when he sacrifices everything, democracy, the Jedi, his own soul, just for the power to stop death, it sets up the whole dramatic arc that makes his eventual redemption by his son Luke so powerful.
Okay, so that's the first 6 films. Then we get the third major shift, which is the sequel trilogy. And this all comes after the massive news in 2012 that Lucas sold Lucasfilm and the entire franchise to Disney.
A monumental shift in ownership and in creative custody. And that transition was, well, it was dramatic. The sources we have make it clear that while Lucas provided very detailed story treatments for the sequels as part of the sale,
He had his own ideas for episodes 7, 8, and 9.
he did. But those ideas were ultimately discarded by the new leadership. The directive for the creative teams, starting with The Force Awakens in 2015, was basically to start from scratch.
And that tension right there between the creator's vision and the corporate need for a fresh start, that's a huge insight into how modern franchises are managed. So the sequel trilogy, The Force Awakens, The Last Jedi in 2017, and The Rise of Skywalker in 2019, it's operating from a different foundation.
It is. So if we were to summarize the whole 9-film arc, you get 3 distinct family stories inside one larger saga. The original trilogy is all about Luke Skywalker's hero's journey, his development into a Jedi and his fight against the Empire.
The prequels give us the tragic backstory. We see Anakin's rise and fall, how Palpatine slowly seduces him to the dark side and his transformation into Darth Vader. It's context for everything.
And then the sequels bring that conflict to the next generation. The focus there is on the turmoil between Leia's son, Ben Solo, who becomes Kylo Ren, and this new Force-sensitive hero, Rey. The whole trilogy really centers on their complex relationship, which leads to them finally teaming up to defeat Palpatine for good, bringing a final, if somewhat controversial, end to the main Skywalker story.
Okay, so that's the core cinematic spine. Let's move beyond the films and talk about the foundational rules of this universe, the concepts that make it all work, starting with the setting itself.
The premise is laid out right from the very first frame. A long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. It's a vast galaxy defined by constant conflict, and it's populated by humans, a huge variety of alien species, and droids.
And the droids are so essential. These sentient robots are programmed for basically every task you can think of. You have protocol droids like C-3PO for translation, astromechs like R2-D2 for mechanics, all the way up to huge armies of battle droids. They provide this accessible, understandable technology that's a great contrast to the more mystical side of things.
And the physical worlds themselves are all about contrast. You have a planet like Coruscant, which is one giant, wealthy city planet. And then you have a remote desert world like Tatooine, which is all about survival and criminal syndicates. The storytellers use this huge variety of planets and asteroid fields and nebulae to create endless possibilities for stories.
One of the crucial points the sources make is that the universe's laws of physics are deliberately less strict than our own, and that's so important for the storytelling. You need to allow for things like faster-than-light hyperdrive travel or moon-sized space stations like the Death Star to exist without getting bogged down in scientific accuracy.
It's all about prioritizing the drama over hard science fiction. Which brings us to the core mythological concept that really holds it all together, the thing that elevates this from sci-fi to space opera, the Force.
How is the Force actually defined in the original films? Because the definition has sort of evolved over time, but that first concept is what really stuck with people.
The original definition, which comes from Obi-Wan Kenobi, is an energy field created by all living things that binds the galaxy together. It's presented almost like a pantheistic god or a universal consciousness. And the Jedi believe it has a will, a balance that they have to maintain.
And people who are strong with the Force get these extraordinary abilities. We're talking superpowers, basically. Things like telekinesis, moving objects with your mind, precognition, seeing glimpses of the future, and different kinds of telepathy or mind control.
Right. Those powers are what really separate the Force users from everyone else with a blaster. And those powers are fundamentally divided, which leads to the two great opposing orders. On one side, you have the Jedi.
The light side.
The light side. They were the peacekeepers of the Galactic Republic. They preach non-attachment, emotional control, selfless service.
And on the other side, you have the Sith, masters of the dark side. They get their power by channeling negative emotions, anger, fear, aggression, hate. Their whole philosophy is about gaining personal power at any cost.
And the structure of the Sith is really interesting. Unlike the Jedi Order, which had thousands of members, the Sith traditionally follow something called the Rule of Two. There can only be one master and one apprentice at any given time.
Why is that? What's the strategic advantage of limiting your numbers so drastically?
It's all about efficiency and stealth.
Yeah.
The purpose wasn't just tradition, it was camouflage. But keeping their numbers to just 2, they could operate in the shadows for centuries, completely invisible to the Jedi. It allowed them to patiently execute their grand plan. Palpatine's rise, the Clone Wars, the collapse of the Republic, all without being detected until it was too late.
So this endless conflict between these two groups provides the backdrop for the larger political entities. You have the Galactic Republic, which falls in the prequels, and then the evil, totalitarian Galactic Empire that rises from its ashes.
And their signature weapons are iconic. The lightsaber, this retractable blade of pure plasma, is the weapon of the Jedi and the Sith. It can cut through almost anything, and importantly, it can deflect blaster bolts, which are the plasma-based firearms used by pretty much everyone else in the galaxy.
But it's not just a two-sided conflict. We also have to talk about the criminal elements, like the Hutt cartel. They thrive in the chaos of galactic war.
Absolutely. The sources really highlight these powerful syndicates that operate in the outer reaches of the galaxy, where the central government has little control. They dominate all the illicit trade, smuggling, piracy, even slavery. They're a constant third party that challenges both sides.
Okay, so since Disney took over, there's been this very deliberate, very formal effort to organize the entire canon into a single, unified timeline. They've created 9 distinct named eras for all the content, which were defined in 2021 and then updated again in 2023. This is basically the official roadmap now.
And it's crucial for understanding where the franchise is headed. They're mapping out thousands of years of fictional history, so every new project has a logical place. Let's start with the earliest eras, which they are now really starting to explore.
The first one is called The Dawn of the Jedi. This is the mythological beginning, the story of the very first Jedi, how the Order was founded. And they're already making a theatrical film set in this period, which shows you how important this deep history is to their future plans.
Right after that, you have the High Republic. This is set about 200 years before the prequel films. It's described as the golden age of the Jedi and the Republic, a time of peace and exploration, but with new threats starting to emerge. This era is the setting for a huge publishing initiative, and most importantly, the new live-action series, The Acolyte.
And also the kids' show, Young Jedi Adventures, so it's a very flexible setting. This structure lets them tell new stories without messing with the established film continuity. Now we get to the eras that contain the main trilogies.
Exactly. They've been given new labels. The Fall of the Jedi is the era that covers the prequel trilogy and the Clone Wars. This is when Palpatine's plan comes to fruition, the Republic collapses, and he executes Order 66 to wipe out the Jedi.
And that catastrophic event leads directly into the reign of the Empire. This is the dark time, when the Emperor's rule is absolute and the last Jedi are being hunted down. This is where you find standalone films like Rogue One and the series Obi-Wan Kenobi and Andor.
And a show like Andor is a perfect example of how they use these eras. It grounds the big mythological conflict in this gritty political reality. It shows you what life was actually like for normal people living under the Empire's boot, which is a big contrast to the epic space battles of the movies.
Then we get to the Age of Rebellion, which is, of course, the original trilogy. This is the peak of the war, where the Rebel Alliance finally fights back and manages to defeat the Empire, leading to Luke Skywalker's return as a Jedi Knight.
And now we enter the modern eras, which is where we've seen the most explosive growth, especially with streaming. The first of these is the New Republic.
So the New Republic is set right after Return of the Jedi. It's about the galaxy trying to rebuild a democracy while fighting off these dangerous Imperial remnants that refuse to give up. This is exactly where the big hit series, The Mandalorian, is set.
The Mandalorian was the very first live-action Disney Plus series back in 2019, and its success was just immediate and overwhelming. It proved that big-budget, episodic Star Wars television could be the main driver for the franchise's future.
And its success immediately led to what some people call the Mandalorian-verse. It spawned all these interconnected spin-offs set in the same era. You have Book of Boba Fett, Ahsoka, and the upcoming Skeleton Crew. They all kind of work together as this one big, serialized story about the New Republic's struggle against the returning Imperial threat.
And speaking of that shift in media, the story of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series is really telling. It was originally planned as a full-length movie.
Right, a standalone film.
A standalone film. But after the standalone solo movie underperformed at the box office, they made the decision to rework the story into a miniseries for Disney Plus instead. It shows you how the market was pivoting away from theatrical gambles and towards the more consistent engagement you get with streaming.
And now it feels like that whole cycle is completing itself. The TV shows are now directly setting up the future of the movies.
They absolutely are. We have a film called The Mandalorian and Grogu, officially scheduled for 2026. That's a television property, literally making the leap to the big screen. Then there's another film mentioned, Star Wars, Starfighter, with some big names attached like Ryan Gosling and Mia Goth, set for 2027.
Beyond those specific releases, Lucasfilm also announced 3 major films in 2023, each set in a different era, kind of laying out their long-term roadmap. First, there's a Dawn of the Jedi film from James Mangold, going way back into the past.
Second, Dave Filoni, who is one of the key creative forces behind the TV shows, is directing a New Republic film. And this is specifically designed to be the cinematic climax to all the storylines from The Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and the other shows, tying it all together.
And the third one is a film from director Sharmeen Obaid-Chinoy set in the final era, The New Jedi Order. This is set 15 years after the sequel trilogy and will follow Rey as she tries to build a new Jedi Order. The Starfighter film is also supposed to be in this future time period.
It's also just important to recognize how fluid development is. There are other projects that are still in flux. Rian Johnson's trilogy is still technically on the books, but not actively being worked on. Taika Waititi's film is moving forward.
And wasn't there a Rogue Squadron film?
There was. It was supposed to be directed by Patty Jenkins, but it faced a lot of delays, and there was talk it might become a TV series instead, though now there are reports she's back working on the script. Even the Lando project, which started as a series, is now being redeveloped as a movie. They're constantly shifting between formats, trying to figure out the best way to tell these stories.
Okay, so the films and TV shows are really just the tip of the iceberg here. The true scale of this universe is in the novels, the comics, the games. And to understand that, we have to talk about the massive content rupture that happened in 2014.
You're talking about the Great Canon restructuring. The shift from what was known as the Expanded Universe, or the EU, to what is now branded as Legends.
Exactly. What was the Expanded Universe?
It was the umbrella term for every officially licensed story outside of the films, from 1976 all the way up to 2014. For almost 40 years, these books and comics were the official continuation of the story. They told fans what happened after Return of the Jedi. It was the accepted history.
And then came April 25, 2014. Disney makes an announcement that all of that existing material would stop being produced, and it would all be rebranded as Star Wars Legends. It was no longer considered official canon.
It was a seismic event for the longtime fans. But the reasoning was very deliberate. They wanted to give the new creative teams, especially for the sequel trilogy, maximum creative freedom. And to manage the new unified timeline, they created the Lucasfilm Story Group.
What does the story group do?
Their entire job is to maintain absolute continuity across all the new media. Every comic, every novel, every video game now has to be approved by them to make sure it all fits together perfectly into one official history.
It's incredible how quickly the franchise took root in print media. The very first novelization actually came out in late 1976, months before the first film was even released.
Right, ghostwritten by Alan Dean Foster. And you can't talk about the print history without focusing on the massive impact of the Legends material, specifically Timothy Zahn's Thrawn trilogy from the early 90s.
This was during a time when there were no new movies. The franchise was essentially dormant.
Completely dormant. And this trilogy of books is widely credited with single-handedly revitalizing the entire franchise. The first book, Heir to the Empire, hit #1 on the New York Times bestseller list. It introduced these incredibly popular characters like the strategic genius Grand Admiral Thrawn and the Emperor's former assassin Mara Jade. For a whole generation of fans, that was the official sequel story.
And the character of Thrawn was so popular that even after the canon wipe, they brought him back.
They did. He was reintroduced into the new official canon in the Rebels animated series, and he's now a major villain in the live-action Ahsoka series. And they even brought Timothy Zahn back to write a whole new series of canon novels about him. It just shows that you can't completely erase the influence of that Legends era.
The comics were also vital in the early days, especially for financial reasons. The original Marvel comic series that started in 1977 was a huge seller.
It was more than a seller. According to former Marvel editor-in-chief Jim Shooter, the sales from the Star Wars comics literally saved Marvel from going bankrupt in 1977 and 78.
Wow, so Star Wars rescued Marvel.
Financially, yes. The comics license eventually moved to Dark Horse, and then after Disney bought Marvel in 2009 and Lucasfilm in 2012, it was only a matter of time before the license came back home to Marvel in 2015. It was all about corporate synergy.
And today, the comics are deeply integrated. We see things like the 2024 comic, The Acolyte Kelnaka.
A perfect example. It's a one-shot comic that gives you the specific backstory for the Wookiee Jedi you see in the Acolyte TV series. The print media is now actively used to fill in the gaps and enrich the on-screen characters. It's all one unified experience.
We should also touch on the audio history. Beyond the amazing John Williams scores, you had things like the 1977 LP, The Story of Star Wars, which was a narrated version of the film.
But the most significant audio project was the NPR radio drama adaptation of the original movie. It was a 13-episode series in 1981. A huge success. And they even got original cast members like Mark Hamill and Anthony Daniels to come back and reprise their role.
And there's an amazing story behind that, right? George Lucas, being a big supporter of public radio, licensed the rights to NPR for only $1.
Just $1. A decision that cost him almost nothing but generated this huge cultural goodwill and kept the franchise alive and in the public consciousness during the years between films. It was a brilliant move.
Okay, finally, let's get into the video games, which also have this history broken into 3 distinct eras.
The first era was just licensed games, from 79 to 93. The very first video game was The Empire Strikes Back for the Atari 2600 in 1982. But the really iconic one was the 1983 arcade game with the vector graphics that let you do the Death Star trench run.
Then Lucasfilm took control and founded its own game company, LucasArts. This era, from 93 to 2014, is when the game started having these complex narratives and cinematic cutscenes.
And this era produced some of the most beloved Legends stories. You had the X-Wing space simulators, and then in 1995 you had Dark Forces, which was the franchise's first real first-person shooter.
And Dark Forces introduced the character Kyle Katarn, a stormtrooper who defects and eventually becomes a Jedi. It's hard not to see the parallel there with Finn's character arc in the sequel trilogy, a disillusioned stormtrooper who discovers he has a greater destiny.
It definitely suggests that successful archetypes from the Legends material were sometimes repurposed for the new canon. And then, after 2014, we enter the current era, the EA Star Wars era. The license moved to Electronic Arts, and now all the games, like the Battlefront reboot or Jedi, Fallen Order, are developed in lockstep with the Lucasfilm story group to ensure they fit perfectly into the official timeline.
So the reason this franchise has lasted so long isn't just because of the merchandising or the complex timeline, it's because of the deep thematic ideas at its core. George Lucas was drawing on some very old, very powerful concepts.
That's really the secret ingredient. The sources are very clear that the saga pulls heavily from ideas of knighthood, chivalry, and Jungian archetypes like the shadow. But the biggest influence, the one Lucas himself always cited, was Joseph Campbell's work on the hero's journey.
He used that as a deliberate template, and you can see it clearly with Anakin, Luke, and Rey. They all follow the same basic steps of that archetypal cycle: the call to adventure, meeting the mentor, the great ordeal. The story feels familiar on a subconscious level, which makes the alien setting feel more human.
And then a character like Kylo Ren is a deliberate reversal of that journey. He's the character who rejects the hero's path to become the villain, which adds another layer of tragic complexity.
One of the key stages in that hero's journey is the atonement with the Father. And the moment in The Empire Strikes Back when Vader reveals he is Luke's father is, well, it's cited as one of the most influential plot twists in movie history. The hero realizes the monster he's fighting is part of him.
And that theme is revisited over and over. Most directly when Kylo Ren kills his own father, Han Solo. It's a dark mirror of that same confrontation. Lucas himself said the main theme of his whole 6-film story was redemption, that even the deepest darkness could be overcome.
Beyond the mythology, the real-world influences are also incredibly strong, particularly political and historical ones. The whole story is a very clear allegory for the struggle between democracy and dictatorship.
And Lucas wasn't subtle about it. He embedded his historical influences directly into the design of the Empire, creating these really chilling parallels. The Nazi parallels in particular are just. They're unmistakable.
Let's list a few of them. The Imperial Stormtroopers get their name from the German shock troopers of World War I. The uniforms of the Imperial officers look very similar to those of WWII German forces, and the caps of the security officers even have a silver death's head insignia, which is very reminiscent of the SS.
Lucas's original idea for the Sith was that they were a group that served the Emperor in the same way the SS served Hitler. That idea got streamlined into the Rule of Two, but the core influence is still there. The Sith are the ideological enforcers of this evil regime.
You also see it in Palpatine's rise to power. The prequels show his step-by-step manipulation of the political system, going from senator to chancellor to emperor. It mirrors historical figures who used democracy to seize absolute power, like Julius Caesar or Napoleon, or more chillingly, Hitler's rise to become Führer.
And the sources are explicit about this. The corruption and fall of the Galactic Republic was modeled directly on the fall of the Democratic Roman Republic and its transformation into the Roman Empire. The political decay, the manipulation of the Senate, it's all borrowed from Roman history.
There are also analogies in the warfare itself. When you see primitive groups like the Ewoks fighting the high-tech empire, it's meant to represent the clash between a primitive society and an advanced one, very similar to what was seen in the Vietnam War.
Even the way the battles are filmed is rooted in history. The space battles were inspired by World War I and II dogfights. The shots from inside the AT-AT walkers in Empire were meant to look like shots from inside tanks in World War II. It all gives the fantasy a sense of visceral reality.
And finally, we have to come back to the huge cultural and industrial shift that Star Wars caused. Its impact on our own culture is it's part of our language now.
Phrases like, "May the Force be with you," or calling something an evil empire are just part of the lexicon. The 1977 film didn't just do well. It kicked off the massive sci-fi boom of the late 70s and 80s. It proved that sci-fi could be a mainstream four-quadrant blockbuster genre.
And it completely changed the business of Hollywood. Along with Jaws, it created the modern summer blockbuster. The industry shifted its focus away from the more sophisticated, character-driven films of the 1970s and towards these huge, spectacle-driven event movies. And it created the template for the modern film trilogy.
Which brings us back to Lucas's most important financial decision. He took that $500,000 pay cut on his director's salary in exchange for keeping the merchandising and sequel rights.
A revolutionary decision at the time.
Because the studios always assumed the real money was at the box office. Lucas saw that the ancillary market, the toys, the lunchboxes, had the potential to be even bigger. By taking that risk, he made his fortune, and he taught Hollywood a lesson about where the real, long-term value of a franchise truly lies.
But that shift did have its critics. There's an argument that Star Wars and Jaws ruined Hollywood by pushing it towards juvenile fantasy and spectacle over more adult, complex stories.
That's a debate that's still part of its legacy. But you can't deny the artistic and technical achievement of the original trilogy. It's consistently ranked as one of the greatest trilogies ever made, and the first film was preserved in the U.S. National Film Registry way back in 1989. It was a watershed moment.
So when we look at everything we've discussed, what it really shows is that the Star Wars franchise is defined less by any one film and more by its incredible structural adaptability.
Exactly. It's a universe that has proven it can be reinvented and repackaged over and over again across every possible timeline and platform, from radio dramas to video games to streaming series. And yet, through all the changes, it somehow manages to hold on to that mythological core about the struggle for balance in the Force.
And now, looking forward, with these new chronological eras spanning thousands of years, from the dawn of the Jedi to the new Jedi Order, the sheer amount of official story is about to explode.
It is. The scale is only going to get bigger.
Which leaves us with a final thought to consider. As the franchise keeps expanding in every direction, trying to tell the story of everyone from the very first Force user to Rey building a new Jedi Order, will this expansion eventually create a saga so vast, so sprawling, that organizing its history becomes almost impossible without that one, single, unifying idea of the Force itself to hold it all together?
A fascinating challenge for them and for us.
Thanks for listening.